Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Los Angeles alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta sorority for inviting me to participate in their 7 days of self-care summit. So thank you so very much. I'm going to talk to you today about mental health, and I call it from the family perspective. So we're going to do like a mental health 101. So as soon as we're ready to go and my slides are up, we will get started. So thank you again. Now the next slide, please. So we're going to talk about mental health, and it's okay to talk about it. I always like to use that term because it is okay to talk about everything, all things mental health. My name is Anita Fisher, and I'm the CEO of Fisher Mental Health Consulting. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to give you my disclaimer. I am not a licensed clinical provider. I am a certified mental health educator. And so this is just letting you know that the information that you will receive and hear about today is to be used so that you can obtain help and support from licensed mental health professionals. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me and my background. I had a 30-year career in banking until mental health entered my life. Basically, my oldest son was diagnosed with a mental health challenge at the age of 21. And I needed help and support, and I didn't know where or how to find it. So I did find an organization called NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, that was so helpful in educating my husband and I and our family about mental illness that I ended up going to work for them. I left my career and I went to work for the chapter, the NAMI San Diego affiliate, and I served in that role for 10 years as the education director. And also within that time, I got myself involved. I saw that the system wasn't exactly serving him the way that I thought it should with this medical condition. So I've joined many and was invited to join many different boards, such as our psychiatric emergency response team, advisory board, the boards on substance use disorder organizations, and also other mental health provider organizations, anywhere that I thought that I could take the voice of the family to the system of care. So next slide, please. So our agenda today, again, we're going to talk about what is mental illness. A lot of times I say it's what is mental illness and what mental illness is not. We're also going to talk about facts and myths about mental illness. And then you're going to hear a little of my personal journey. And we're going to talk about also how you can help someone who may be affected by mental health challenges. Next slide, please. So let's start with what is mental illness? Mental illness is a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning. So just as diabetes is a condition of the pancreas, mental illness is a condition of the brain. So it's a medical condition that should be treated like any other. So it's not a character flaw. It's not that someone just all of a sudden started acting out and it's something they can just snap out of or change. It does take professional medical assistance to assess and find out what areas of a mental illness this person may be experiencing and how to relieve those symptoms and help them live a quality life. So next slide, please. So mental illnesses can affect anyone of any age, and there are many different things that you can see here on the screen that can indicate that a person may be having a mental health struggle. And it's also It's a clinical based struggle. So it's not something that, oh, it's a person just kind of in a bad mood today. There is actually something affecting their brain. And this slide will show you many of the different things that a person may experience when they are, again, having a struggle. So next slide, please. And then the next slide. So we'll go to the next one. So who can mental illness affect? Well, of course, mental illness can affect a person of any age, race, religion, or income. It has nothing to do with your socioeconomic background, where you come from, even how you grew up. Yes, there are certain things that sometimes can impact the onset of illness, such as your environmental. We know that it is environmental triggers involved. But actually, again, because it's medical condition, and a lot of times people find out that it's genetic, that it is also someone else in their family history that also may have had a mental health struggle. It's just like even in my own family, I know people have diabetes, hypertension, and so I would be at risk for having those things as well. Well, it's the same with a mental illness diagnosis. Next slide, please. So in the United States, 1 in 5 adults, approximately 52.9 million people, experience a mental illness. And one of the terms I learned at NAMI is you are not alone. And that is one of the things, when I saw that statistic, I knew that we were not the only ones experiencing, and that my son was not the only one experiencing this. And these figures come from the National Institute of Mental Health, who tracks this type of information. So thank you. Next slide, please. 1 in 5 children and adolescents have a mental health need. And half of all mental illnesses begin by age 14 and 3/4 by age 24. And over 22 years ago now, when we first started on this journey with our family member, I thought it was just adults. I thought, okay, this happened. I learned that that age range that they may start to experience symptoms is between 16 and 24. But now they recognize that these symptoms can appear much earlier. And so many programs now are gearing towards the school age children. And I know that even NAMI, who used to just kind of serve the 18 and above adults, they now have several programs that they have launched that serve the schools. They go in, they have people who themselves are living successfully with their mental health challenges, but they had symptoms as a child. They go in and they talk about what that felt like. And then they have education programs similar to the one that we took for our adult son. They have it for parents. It even tells them how to work with the IEPs and everything in the school system. So with these numbers coming out, they recognize that we have to start earlier so that it's not that big break later on in that young person's life. So next slide, please. And this is a statistic that is just very, very hard. 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system have a mental illness. Half of the individuals with a mental health condition, age 8 to 15, do not receive treatment. And one of the reasons we found that happens, and we've heard this from people who, again, they started to feel different. They started to have these symptoms early on, but they were afraid to tell anyone. Because what do we hear? What do we see depicted in movies and on TV about mental illness? That the person is, quote, crazy, or it's something wrong with them, or they're going to lose their friends, or, they even think they may be rejected by their own family. So a lot of young people won't talk about it. And that's why there's many different programs that go into the schools to make it easier. And we talk to other youth about, if you have a friend, they may even share it with a very close friend. Well, that friend can then go with them to speak with the counselor, go with them to talk to their family member. because we don't want them. They found out that instead of that these kids are, quote, bad kids, they said this is what was happening to a lot of youth that do end up in the juvenile system. So next slide, please. So let's talk about this from an African American perspective. We found that a lot of studies have been done, and African Americans may be resistant to seek treatment because they fear it may reflect badly on their families, an outward admission of the family's failure to handle problems internally. And I know that I come from such a family where when things were going on, you kept it in the house. You didn't go and spread things that might be bad out, in the community, that we didn't talk about it. And there might even have been a family member that lived with a mental health struggle, but they were just lovingly taken care of, but nobody talked about really what might have been going on with that individual. Next slide, please. So, according to the American Psychiatric Associations, African Americans are one, less likely to receive guideline consistent care, less frequently included in research, and more likely to use emergency rooms or primary care rather than a mental health system. So this normally happens because, again, there was a stigma. Even we had a stigma as a family. My son had started, and you're going to hear about his story a little later on in the presentation. He has a video that he shares his story. But oftentimes, we didn't want that to be real. I said, well, no, this can't be something. Even when I read and was told that this might be a mental health diagnosis, I was like, but everything about his life was so normal. We never saw anything. He had started to use street drugs and alcohol to self-medicate those symptoms that he was having. And so I thought, well, it must be a drug and alcohol problem. So even my own self-stigma, as a mother, it was easier to say that he had a had a substance use disorder issue versus, that he had a mental health challenge. So that's again the stigma that always surrounded mental health. Next slide, please. So here's another statistic about African American teens. Rutgers University did a study that found that Black teenagers in the United States face discrimination multiple times a day and most frequently online. And as we think about, so what have our children been doing over the last 2.5 years? They've been online. They've had to go to that as a means of their education. So this increased over the last 2.5 years. And this study found that the individuals, and I want to read a little bit more about that to you from this study. It says that for years, Black adolescents were forced to face anti-Black microaggressions on a daily basis. Importantly, this study expands the research on the many ways that discrimination happens, whether it's being teased by peers, asked to speak for their racial group in class, or seeing a racist post on social media. And so a lot of times this adds to the additional. Remember, I mentioned earlier that yes, it is a medical condition, but there are also outside environmental triggers that can take place. And that can be some of these things that I just disclosed to you. So a lot of times teenagers who may be struggling, there's that other added feature. And then we'll talk about, that's why sometimes, and we're not saying that always and only that a therapist should be an African American, but that they should at least have had some training in cultural competency of working with other populations, because they would need to understand this kind of trauma that can happen to African Americans, period, and then African American teens as well. So next slide, please. So racial disparities in the mental health and criminal justice system. This is a big one because this affected us personally as well. Oftentimes, instead of my son receiving treatment, he would be sent to jail. And I know that this was being done at a rate very far different from his white counterparts because I did a lot of classes and groups and I was constantly in contact with other family members. And I know that their loved one wasn't going to jail as frequently. And that's why I did become involved in a lot of places where, or like training police officers when you deal with, individuals and their families. And that's why I also got involved. I wanted to put the face of not just a mother and a family, but of an African American mother and family, and so they could see that, no, this was a well-raised young man and that this is this medical condition that may be causing this. And he should be taken to the psychiatric unit versus taken to jail because of something that might happen. So again, I want to share a little bit of extra information about this. This could have especially negative effects for people of color with mental illness, since pre-trial jail incarceration has significant negative health impacts as well. And I can tell you that we saw this. Other evidence shows that mental health screening tools used by jails reproduce the racial disparities, resulting in fewer Black and Latinx people screening positive and thus remaining under referred and underdetected in the jail population. So I will tell you that as a mother, once I learned and started to see this, that would be my first point of advocacy. If he was arrested, I would, one, have a history of his mental health diagnosis and his doctors and what medication he took. I would make sure that that was faxed into the jail so that I could make sure that he was moved into the psychiatric area of the jail, because it is a big difference where they would be in a single cell versus being in general population. And if he was in his symptoms, that means that he could become a target of the people in general population. So for their own safety, we have to be sure that they are moved out of that environment. Okay, next slide, please. So as we know, that nationwide data arrest records show that Black people were 2.17 times more likely to be arrested than white people in 2016. As we know, what happened in 2020 with finally the bubbling over of all of this. And so if you think about it, individuals with the mental health condition, these same statistics sit, as I was saying, with them, and they end up overrepresented in the jail and prison systems. One of the largest mental health treatment locations in the country is actually the Los Angeles County Jail. So next slide, please. So one of the things that, we want to share is that recovery is possible. I know that was some very daunting kind of negative information talking about, things that can happen, but recovery is possible with mental health challenges. Most people with mental health problems can get better. Treatment and recovery are ongoing processes that happen over time, but the first step is getting help. So the next slide, please. So here are some recovery facts. 80% of those with bipolar disorder and 65 of those with major depression quickly respond to treatment. 60% of those with schizophrenia can be relieved of acute symptoms with proper treatment. And assertive community treatment reduces hospitalizations, incarcerations, homelessness, and increases employment in decent housing and a quality life. And I can tell you that I got to see this up close and personal. I saw my son when he was on his recovery journey, meaning that for him, it was medication and therapy that helped him to have a quality of life. But also at my job at NAMI, we hired what we call people with lived experience, peer and family specialists to work within the behavioral health community, and also to present the NAMI signature programs and classes. So I had a staff of over up to 20 people, and all of them had lived experience. So I saw recovery. They had every level of college education, they had every level of education and experience. And some, even though they might have been older, they were just stepping out for the first time and knowing that, yes, I can work and I can make a difference and have a good quality life. So next slide, please. So I want to talk about another statistic that is fairly new, and I call it the unsung caregivers, because there was a study done in 2016, and it was a study of family members that have a loved one living with them, or a loved one very, very closely tied to them in their life. And a lot of times we were not looked at as caregivers like it would be for any other illness where you're treating and taking care of someone. And they found that 8.4 million individuals were caregiving for their loved ones. And I just almost cried when I saw this report finally done. And the people that they interviewed, it was over, they said they had been providing this care for over 8.7 years. And one thing about mental health challenges, an individual living with mental health challenges, is they have a very long lifespan, a lot of them. It's not a short term, or like you hear about with many caregivers of people with different types of illnesses. It might be, a few years, it could be a few months. But with a person living with a mental health challenge, it is very long. And because these individuals usually can't hold a job, sometimes at all, sometimes full time, they may be able to receive a Social Security disability, but that's a challenge to do. I went through that as well with my own son. But many of them, the family members have to end up subsidizing them financially as well. I've heard cases where family members have had to go back to work because they may have even retired, but they realize that those retirement dollars weren't enough to help them with their loved one. But now, again, there are many different ways they are looking at that, making it a little easier for them to get on Social Security. And there's housing situations where they take just enough. They know what the Social Security benefit is, and they make sure that they can be housed with that. And then also they are so that they can be respite for the family, because again, it can be very long term. As I've said, our journey has been 22 years now. Okay, next slide, please. And a lot of and here's just a few statistics on that, where it shows that the average age of the person was 46 years old. Almost half live in the same household. So these are just a few statistics from that study. And again, about being financially dependent as well. So next slide, please. So now I want to kind of do something that's a little interactive. I use this in a lot of my presentations. And because we've talked about a lot of information. So I just want to hear from you, and you can type it in the chat. And also, if you have any questions that pop into your head, start putting those in the chat as well. And then we'll go through and address any of those. So if you'll just put in fact or myth, kids can't get depression or anxiety. Only adults can. Do you think that is a myth or a fact? So I'll give you a few seconds to type that in. And if Miss Ona say will just let me know what she's seeing or if I'll be able to see it. Okay, someone has myth. Correct. Definitely a myth. 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 Yes. Well, let's put up the slide again. Yes, it is a myth. Kids can develop a mental illness like depression and anxiety. This can happen to anyone at any age. Okay, so the next question. Kids only get mental illness because they have bad parents. So what do you think? Is that a myth or a fact? So go ahead and type that in the chat box. And so can we, yes, myth. Yes, myth, myth, yes, very much so. Okay, so could you please put up the slide? That's right, it's a myth. Mental illness is not caused by doing something wrong. Also, you can't cause someone to have mental illness. Doctors think that, oops, sorry, I was reading that. Doctors think that mental illness is caused by a mix of what's going on in your body and what's happening around you. Thank you. Next one. Mental illness is the same as being disabled, sometimes incorrectly called mental retardation. So is that a myth or a fact? So we'll wait for a few of the responses to come in. Okay, we have someone that said a fact. Can we have any more? Some say a fact. Fact. Okay, we have a lot of people with fact. Okay, let's see what the response is. So it is actually a myth. Mental illness has nothing to do with how smart you are. A mental disability is a cognitive disability, which means it's a different journey with different challenges. It's still important to treat all people with respect because you don't know what it's like to live in their shoes. Okay, so let's do a couple more here. Okay, having a mental illness means you're a wimp and can't handle life. So what do you think? Is that a myth or a fact? So let's see what some of the responses are. Myth. Myth. Okay, myth. Okay, and let's see that slide. So correct, it is a myth. Your personality or ability to handle your feelings does not cause mental illness. Mental illness is not just in your head or something that goes away if you try hard. The right combination of what helps is different for each person. Once they find something that helps them, most people with mental illness live healthy, full lives. Thank you. Okay, the next. So people with mental health challenges have to take special tests to get a job or go to college. Is that a myth or a fact? Myth. Okay, I don't know if we have any other responses. Another myth. Okay, so let's see the response to that one. So correct, it is a myth. People with mental health challenges do not have to take special tests to get into college, get a house, or get a job. They can work, learn, and do all things that other people can do without mental health challenges. However, I always add here that you can get support and assistance if you're going to college and live with a mental health condition, that you can get sometimes time to take tests, extra time. You can also get someone that may be able to take notes at times, but there is support by people going to their counselors, letting them know. And there are people that have gone through, like I said, I've met many people with bachelor's, master's, PhDs that live with a mental health challenge. Okay, let's do the next one. When people have a mental illness, they will never get better. Is that a myth or a fact? We have any responses coming in? Myth. Okay. Myth. Okay, so let's see what it says for that one. People diagnosed with the mental illness can get better. Every illness is different. Some people feel better when they talk to someone like a friend or a doctor or take medication. Most people need help from friends and family to talk and figure out how to live with their illness. Not all people have to take medicine or see a therapist for the rest of their lives. Next, talking about your mental health challenges is a waste of time and it's better to just take medicine. So I'm just going to go through the next few of these because I'm also gauging my time and I want to be able to do any Q&A at the end. So let's put up the myth or fact. Myth. If you have a broken leg, it will not get better with just aspirin. It also takes time and exercise and hard work. In a way, having a mental health illness is the same. You have to be patient, get help, and talk about it, and you'll start to feel better too. Okay, let's do the next one. People with the mental illness are dangerous and violent. So let's look at the answer to that. That is a myth. Most people diagnosed with mental illness are not violent. Most violence in the world is not caused by people with a mental illness. In fact, a person with a mental illness is more likely to be the one who gets hurt or bullied by someone else. And unfortunately, this is what we see in the news. We see the sensational stories that come out, and they may say that that individual has a mental health condition. But as you can see, sheer numbers of people who live with mental illness, that's a very, very small number of people that might have committed something. Okay, next. I can't help someone with a mental illness, only a doctor can. So let's see the answer to that. And that is a myth. You can help someone who has a mental illness. Don't call people words like crazy or mental. That will keep them shying away from you if they want to come to you for help. If you know people with mental health challenges, try to get them to notice their talents and skills, not just their illness. Learn about mental wellness and share it with others. If you hear something that isn't true, don't be afraid to speak up and talk about it. Okay, well, thank you all for being interactive with me and during this period. So now I want to share a little bit about my personal journey. We are the Fisher family, and this is just some pictures of us over time. I have two sons. My oldest son is the one who I've been referring to that lives with the mental health challenge, and he has his younger brother. And so I always say to people, I said, mental illness is a family illness. It is just like when anyone else is diagnosed or gets sick in your family, the whole family is affected by that. The whole family gathers around to support that person. Well, it's the same thing. And I always say when my son is doing well, I'm doing well. When my son is not doing well, then I'm not doing so well. The whole family isn't doing so well. His brother is sad. He likes to see when his brother is thriving. And my husband, he likes to see when he is thriving. So, next slide, please. So this is just a few more pictures, and I kind of do this sometimes to show that everything about him was, quote, normal. And I know that some people say, normal. What is normal? Normal is the setting on a washing machine or a dryer. But what really is normal? But in everything that he did throughout his life, we had no indication that this was coming. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that's just some more of his life. And so now we're going to show a video, and you're going to see my son speak about his journey. This is about a few years old when he made this for actually our county behavioral health. It was a stigma campaign about reducing the stigma associated with mental illness, and he was selected to make this video. So I know that Miss On, yes, great.
In 1997, I passed basic training in AIT school with flying colors. I also loved sports, playing it, watching it, dominating in it, as well as following it. Then, how did I find myself sitting in front of a psychologist, diagnosed with schizophrenia? I felt hopeless and overwhelmed. Shortly thereafter, I would face stigma. I remember this one particular moment, sitting in a group and looking up at the sun shining through a window, and a counselor saying, "You're having eternal stimuli, aren't you? You're hearing voices. Why are you looking up?" Stigmatization happened a lot in my life. I couldn't smile to myself or whisper prayers because people would think I was hearing voices. It made me feel imprisoned, like my freedom of self expression had been taken away. I left the military not understanding and accepting that I needed help. I spent 11 years in and out of jails, prisons, institutions, and homeless. With God and family support, I finally sought help and came to a place of recovery. It took several attempts to get better, but I eventually came to a place of acceptance. I got involved in several programs, and listening to other people's stories of their experiences with mental illness inspired me. I too began to share my journey. I learned to listen and accept the help and support that was out there waiting for me. Today, I am 2 years free from active addiction. I have peace for my symptoms and I am filled with hope. I still love to play and watch sports, watch movies, and listen to music. I work for NAMI as a peer helpline specialist and I live with my loving family. My life has truly been restored.
Okay. Thank you. So, that journey and that video, like I said, was made probably um, about maybe 8 to 10 years ago. And yes, because the recovery journey for a person with mental illness may go like this, it's up and down. And my son did have struggles even after that video was made, because when he stops his medication, his symptoms return, and he lives with an additional feature. They call it anosognosia, which means lack of insight, meaning he does not know that his mental health challenge symptoms have returned. So we go through, he's doing quite well today, and he lives in a program. He lives in a home, but it's a program for people who live with mental health challenges. He goes and comes. He is a disabled veteran. He was a medical specialist at Walter Reed when this happened, but it took some years for them to change and upgrade his discharge. So he lives that quality of life that I always, wanted to see happen. Now, I have another short video that I'm going to show you that was made by some other NAMI members. And we actually did this again to show the African American voice about mental illness.
I really just couldn't accomplish anything that I wanted to do. I was trying desperately to either go to school or go to work, and I couldn't. I was in a desperate crisis situation.
Her mental illness was so obvious, but at the same time, her desperation and sadness was so obvious as well.
I often tell people that I was a real mess. That leads ultimately to a point in your life where you feel that you just can't take it anymore, and you're ready to check out. The King of Kings lifted me off the floor that night and said to me, "Clarence, what are you doing?" And I said in retort, "Why me?" And no sooner did I get those words out of my mouth, the answer came, "Well, why not you? Would you rather your sister or your brother or your child?"
Mental illness was something I knew nothing about.
It's hard for people to talk about mental health problems.
I really at one point thought, wow, maybe Black people don't recover. Do people who look like me recover? Because I'm not seeing it. And I got a little worried. I had this moment of worry. I was doing fine, but I had this moment of worry that maybe this was all fake, or that it would just shatter like glass or something. I thought it was something to fear. I thought it was something that was going to be devastating for our son, that he could never have a good quality of life again.
You don't have to suffer alone. You don't have to believe that you're stuck with it the rest of your life.
When I got sober 23 years ago, and I went into these rooms and asked for help, and they said, ask that old dude over there for some help. I said, I gotta ask for help. They said, yeah, you have to ask somebody for help. They said, ask that old dude over there. And when I asked the old dude, I didn't know that the old dude was a psychiatrist.
I now have a journey and a recovery story that I can share with other families. So that's where I always start with them, is just don't give up hope. It seems hopeless, but know that recovery is possible. Everybody has their place of recovery. It's different for everyone, but it is there. It is possible. And that's really what peer support is. Nothing more is someone who has walked in that shoe, and in that space that you've been in, to be able to share their experience, to be able to definitely make you feel like you're not alone. Like, I never felt like I was alone. Like, wow, somebody else has been through that.
You'd have to think about that. And I think people get it. People understand, because they have been to that point where they feel like they're in a struggle, and they really are. We really are in a struggle. But guess what? We're all in this struggle. We all are.
See, that was the thing that I learned from Nami and was able to pass on to him, was about recovery, and say you can have that great quality of life. You can be, many of the things that you've always wanted to be. You just happen to have a mental illness at the same time.
Recovery is not, these symptoms are going to go away and I'm going to be happy and carefree and joyful the rest of my life. Recovery is, in fact, having uh, achieved a greater capacity for things like love and creativity and work and integrity.
In recovery, I learned, oh, you take two steps forward, one step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's this sort of back and forth, back and forth. But what I like about the spiral sort of analogy is you're always moving forward. And sometimes I may be moving a little bit slower, or it may even appear that I've stopped, but I haven't gone backwards. I'm still moving forward.
I have found a way to express those things that have been hidden in me for so many years, and I did not know it was there, which caused me to become compassionate, caring, hopefully authentic, loving, and understand the need of another human being.
The critical thing that I found in NAMI was that there's a voice. Um, I found my voice in recovery through NAMI.
At NAMI, we embrace the entire family. We have this journey that we've all been on together. We rely on each other. People say, when you speak about NAMI, when you speak about what you do, you just light up. You're so passionate about it. I said, because it's so helpful to others. And that's the greatest thing that I see, is how we can help a family.
I have found a way to not extend my life, but to make my life more relative to human beings. And I've done that through what I've learned, not just through NAMI, the principles and all that, but through the people who are so passionate and who are so desperately in love with their family members and friends.
Okay, thank you. So that was again. I love to share those videos. Even though they're a little dated, they never get old. It is still relevant today. Everything that was said, and even showing the up and down of the journey, even with my own son. So let's go to the next slide here. How can I help someone? One thing is finding out about the local resources where you are, the mental health. If you type in behavioral health or mental health resources, you should receive all of the information in your local area, and finding your local NAMI. NAMIs are all over the country. I know the number used to be somewhere around 1,100 NAMIs all over. There's over 50 NAMIs in the state of California. And so you should be able to find a NAMI near you, and they can also give you those resources. Next slide, please. And then one of the things I like to share too is talk about recovery language, because words do matter. As you heard me mention earlier, like my son has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but he is not a schizophrenic. He is not his illness. So how you address people and you talk about mental illness is also how you can make another person feel comfortable. He or she lives with that particular condition. And if someone is doing something out of what's quote out of the norm, we see it driving down the street, we see it, instead of saying in front of a group of young people or children, oh, look at those crazy people, or look what he's doing, you say, that person is struggling today. and that's how we start to change and erase the stigma associated with mental illness. So next slide, please. So again, find out. So, taking this information from this slide, what is the local mental health crisis intervention number? What's the local NAMI number? If it's a child or a youth, find out, who the school counselor is or principal, and then the friend's parents. Sometimes children trust other parents more so than they do their own. So if another child would come up to you and say about something that they're feeling, it would be, you would go ahead and reach out to that child's parents as well, and encourage them to get help, but not to fall apart. Oh my God, or no, and they may be in denial. A lot of times we are in denial in the beginning years, but you would just encourage them to find out information from the professional. Okay, and the next slide. So suicide prevention resources, and that is a big one. So just knowing where the suicide prevention resources are, again, just go online and Google it or whatever search engine you use, and to know this information. Okay, next slide, please. So a quick question. Just want to know, did you learn anything today new about mental health? And as I wait for your responses to come in, we can go to the next slide because I know we're very close to the end time here. And just wanted to know if you have any questions, and I don't know if there are any questions in the chat box. And I see a question. So what are some of the self-care things a person can do with a mental illness? Well, self-care is finding what it is that makes you calm and peaceful. Some people walk, or they exercise, or they get in a room and they will turn the lights down and put on some soft music. As a matter of fact, there's an app that NAMI San Diego developed, and it's called Oscar, and it's about resources here in the San Diego area, but also in the app, they put some of the calming music. You can even get it online now, get it from the TV, any music app that you might listen to. They usually have calming music, the water sound or the ocean sounds. So that is some of the ways that a person can do self-care. Thank you for that question. Any other questions or comments? Someone said yes. Yes, they learned a lot. Yes. Thank you. And then the next slide, please. So I want to leave you all with this, is just to remember that you are not alone. You're not alone if you're a person that may be struggling with mental health challenges. You are not alone if you have a loved one that may be struggling with a mental health challenge. There is help out there. And like I said, it took me 3 years to find that help and support, but this is why I do this. This is why I share our journey and our story, because I want to let as many people as possible know that there is help and support. And again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to allow me to come and present to you today at your self-care summit. It's been wonderful. And thank you for doing this. It's such a great, just so many people have gotten so much great information from your 7 days. So thank you again for including me.